letting people in.
We're about ready to start, but my laptop says recording is already going on.
Are you? Oh, good call.
Are you recording to the cloud or?
There. Now you
you're
should be able to record. Wait.
Yes. Okay.
Wait.
Please ask the host to give you permission.
Oh, wait.
You have permission for me to be recorded. if that's what
There
it
you
is.
go. Good. So are we good? Yeah.
Now it says it's recording. I hope that means.
Yeah, if you look at next to the people, like On's recording, hers is a little circle, and the other co-hosts have a cloud icon. So you know.
Okay,
you're
I have the
recording.
cloud. Okay, I'm good. I'm sorry. All right, we're good to go then.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so I'm starting, yes?
Well, they're coming in now, so just wait a little bit.
Oh, sure. Okay, let me know.
I'm disabling the waiting room. Oops. It says I enabled it.
Yeah, we cook at the same time.
Yep. Okay.
Good. Action.
I go ahead, yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, hello, everyone, and thank you for your interest in this subject, the subjective influences through the 10 seed groups. Before beginning, I want to start with an opening meditation or visualization. You don't have to necessarily close your eyes unless you want to. Project yourself into space and observe the earth. We see it as having many places of existence. The physical etheric planes have varied forms of life and kingdoms, from the mineral to the plant to the animal to the human. In a three-dimensional context, the horizontal worldly physical plane life would be the x-axis, and it extends to multiple planes of existence. In esotericism, we call this the cosmic physical plane. I'll show you a chart for that shortly. Within this cosmic physical plane, there's also exist many humans who are at different levels of evolution and consciousness. There are those who are not aligned with their soul and are focused living a very horizontal physical plane oriented form of life. And there's also those who are vertical aspiring in consciousness towards the spiritual soul aligned life. With humans being the dominant influencers within this dimensional space, they affect all worldly life, all thought forms, all possibilities, successes, failures, hopes, and aspirations that exist in this realm. As humans, we have the potential to act as awakening cells in consciousness in the universal mind. And we are part of a great evolving unity called the Plan. Our civilization as a whole is a reflection of this concept demonstrated in the 10 seed groups. Also within this realm, the cosmic physical plane, are a group of ascended masters and guides known as the hierarchy, who influence leaders of the seed groups and New World servers and their activities. The hierarchy's purpose as custodians of God's plan is for implementing the plan as the will of God. From the outset, we hold that there is a kernel of spiritual ideation and spiritual foundation behind all seed groups from the ashramic level, and that civilization is evolving towards this realization. Goals and purpose in this course. In the front of the books of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan master Dwell Kul, known as DK, is what's called the extract of the Tibetan. To paraphrase it, if the material I'm presenting feels right to you, accept it. Otherwise, put it down and move on. In this course, virtually everything I'm presenting is based on what GK related regarding the 10 seed groups or service groups. For me as a teacher and guide, I seek to inform, educate, and influence where possible. But you, the listener, make the choice for change and understanding within yourself. Major theme for this course, using your own intuition for discerning meaning and truth. Much of what I'll be talking about is of a subjective nature. I'll be returning to this theme throughout the course. My purpose is not just to inform you about each of the 10 seed or service groups, but provide information about what is behind the changes, the great planetary evolution at the level of civilization that is occurring right before our eyes. I will be interjecting numerous practical and current real-world examples of problems that humanity is currently dealing with. A study of the 10 seed groups also provides a sense of hope, with the notion that the new group of world servers or service workers are conscious change agents for establishing a higher human potential throughout all the seed groups. Keep in mind, for each seed group, it evolves with workers who have the potential for shifting civilization toward fulfilling the plan. Changes are determined based on how open each individual worker is to the spiritual influence and impression. I'll discuss this concept in some detail as we go along and with each seed group. For subtle points on purpose, our purpose, or one purpose of this course, is to stimulate your imagination and cause you to see the world's issues in a whole new light. This course is not about providing detailed solutions to humanity's problems. Everything about the seed or the service groups is about evolution and change. I will at different points show how the service worker can determine what's happening on the inner and the outer planes and to take positive action for helping humanity. I will not be describing a utopian vision, but present a vision of what we are already tending towards. This idea is largely based on an incoming seventh ray energies and the principle of sharing and synthesis. Of course, at different times, I'll be stopping periodically and inviting your comments. During the course, please refer to the handouts, particularly one on terminology for frequently used terms. I'll be using the term 10 seed groups interchangeably with 10 service groups. So it's one and the same topic or name. The term new group of world servers, I'll be also interchanging with service workers. They're one and the same. This will be a 10-session course running through June of next year. In this course, we'll be examining each seed group individually, but also how they work together and make and influence the whole of world civilization. During this course, we'll be examining many background energies about the nature and purpose of the hierarchy, the plan, new group of world servers, the Ashrams for each seed group. I will also be interjecting how discipleship fits together with the actions of an individual and leader as a change agent, not necessarily consciously. For every session, I'll be covering at least one seed group. For some of the seed groups, such as the magnetic healers and the psychologists, I'll be combining them as they are related in their activities. So I'm going to put a question out to you immediately. If I use the term rays, the 7 rays, for example, is there anybody that does not understand what I mean? This is not a course on the rays, but referencing their influence has considerable esoteric advantage for explaining concept. There is a handout I put out on the 7 rays. It's a brief overview. Okay, let's see, moving on. The Great Transition. We note that the conflict, confusion, chaotic change, and disruption of our times that seemingly leaves so many people in despair is due to a shifting energy flows as one age and ray passes out of activity, and another age and energy pattern comes into influence. In the Ageless Wisdom teachings, there is an understanding that there are two great ages and astrological cycles overlapping each other. These are Pisces and Aquarius. Pisces represents the ego-centered me, individual consciousness, beginning 2,000 years ago. This has not been just about individual actions, but individual nations and nation states that have acted only in their interests, and that the concept and working together in cooperation also began during this age.
David,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Please go a little bit more slower for the interpreters.
No problem. The so-called Aquarian Age begins astrologically in 2117 and represents the transition towards greater group awareness. The influence of this coming age is already being felt and represented by the Aquarian principle of sharing, cooperation, goodwill, unity, and equality. We are completing a great cycle as we transition towards the Aquarian Age. The Tibetan DK said the hierarchy will meet in conclave to discuss the next stage in evolution for humanity. In the first stages of the externalization of the hierarchy and for the reappearance of the Christ or the world teacher. I'll be discussing conclaves and their significance in October's talk. DK tells us the externalization of the masters and the reappearance of the Christ is actually about the externalization of higher soul values, such as cooperation, goodwill, right human relations, working out through the 10 seed groups, although nothing is ever imposed. Indeed, they are returning to awaken humanity with the knowledge that the Christ will return as a guide and teacher and not as savior for humanity. Service workers acknowledge the existence of the separate mindset, me versus them, and seek to bring balance between the higher incoming spiritual energies and with those whose focus is limited on a selfish nature. This process could be described about how the higher energies of the incoming seventh ray energies of Aquarius and from the hierarchy are represented as a transformative spiritual tension for mankind. The combination of the Aquarian and Piscean energies has ironically created a near constant friction or tension in the political, social, cultural, and economic sectors in which all of the 10 seed groups work. World Arjuna, a metaphor for our time. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna and Krishna are on a great battlefield amidst the fighting. Krishna, acting as the soul, tells Arjuna he must seek guidance and act from the higher spiritual energy and viewpoint. The concept of the world Arjuna is actually a metaphor for today, where the conflict between the existing materialistic domination that must be overcome by the individual and group to allow for spiritual control to come forth. Arjuna, as disciple, is the spiritual worker. He stands bewildered between the opposing selfish forces of the lower personality and the soul. He wonders where his duty lies. Taking the world Arjuna metaphor into today's context, Arjuna also represents the symbolic leader, striving to find vision that allows him or her to see the way through a given crisis. The present social, political, and economic situation is considerably astral-based and is an outcome of desire and selfish urges by forces that seek to maintain control of the physical plane. Within the old sixth ray patterns of separatism, greed, and selfishness in the world, They run counter to the new focus of the incoming Aquarian influence, which represents cooperation, goodwill, and synthesis. As a result, there is a strong demand for resolving the existing separative mindsets around such issues as racism and conservatism, which block or thwart efforts for higher energies to succeed. Note, when you hear me use the term conservative, I am referring to entrenched forces using thought and lower mental dominance of the lower 18 subplanes. I'll explain the subplanes shortly in the diagram. They are in essence intransigent and do all they can for denying the light from gaining entrance. Elements of the liberal forces, so-called liberal forces, speaking in political ideologies, also have a measure of wanting to maintain control of the form nature and influence from that point. A great balance must be found, not through personality dominance, but only through soul guidance. The soul is not attached to control, ambition, or personal exploitation. We'll be returning to these themes throughout the course. This is the 3 planetary centers diagram. It's just a basic overview. You have this, of course, as one of your handouts. It basically says that there's 3 major aspects coming from Shambhala that act as an influence and guide for the hierarchy and humanity. There's 3 great centers: Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity. And they're closely interrelated, and as a whole represent the concept of divine livingness. Keep in mind that although the Christ and the Buddha are not physically in incarnation, they also act as influences and hold the vision from beyond for the lower 49 planes in carrying out the plan. Very briefly, Shambhala represents will, purpose, and synthesis. That purpose is focused as one great tension of will, love, and active intelligence. Those are the 3 main rays of aspect. The hierarchy is another planetary center. They act as custodians of the plan. They receive and interpret the plan as will, step down from Shambhala, and telepathically impress the service workers around the world. The Humanities Center is made up of service workers who act as intermediaries between hierarchy and humanity for implementing the plan. The right use of these energies will positively affect change and behaviors of leaders in government and those who influence the economic and social sectors for all the seed groups. In essence, all departments of society are affected. And this diagram, I hope you can see it. You just generally have to see it. You can study the diagram later in your own time as a handout. It's known as the cosmic physical plane, and it's also known as the human constitution. In the cosmic physical plane, the vast majority of humanity exists in consciousness in these lower 18 subplanes here. Using my cursor here, I hope you can see that. Brief overview of spiritual evolution for the individual and humanity. The monad at this level up here, or pure spirit, expresses through what is called the spiritual triad. That's this light gray sector right here. It's made up of Atma, pure will, Buddhi, pure love, pure reasoning and intuition, and Manas, which is this right down here, the mental plane expressed through the soul. It is through the soul that the lower man can contact the spiritual triad. So this small black triangle right here is basically symbolic of the soul, and you as a personality connect through meditation. The soul acts as an agent and is representative throughout your incarnation and is constantly available to communicate with, to transmit and radiate the higher values of harmlessness, love, goodwill, and cooperation. This is a key concept to grasp for this course. That the masters exist here on these higher planes and above, that they transmit or they impress ideas through the soul to the personality. For discussing the 10 seed groups at the level of civilization, going through its own evolution, also at different levels, there is evolution of the individual within civilization. So the individual must ultimately awaken, purify, act responsibly, and integrate with his higher self as he carries out all activities. There's the evolution of the leaders in society. Seed groups must learn to be governed by soul impulse and hierarchical inspiration, again through impression. This level of communication can be through impression or telepathy or both, and allows the individual to work with purpose and intent for carrying out their part of the plan. And finally, another form of evolution is the evolution of the group. Individuals in the group, including a nation like the United States of America or Thailand or Greece, they can be considered to be individuals in their own group consciousness. And they form a body or a soul that must awaken and purify and act with a greater sense of purpose with all their activities. I think I'll stop here and ask if anybody has any questions or comments.
I don't see any at this point, but I hope everyone has been able to download the attachments from the link that I posted in the chat box. So,
Okay,
no hand.
and of course, anybody, if you're listening to this and you didn't quite get everything, you can always come back to it later on. You can listen to the talk. It's going to be posted in Makara later today. And of course, all the attachments are all available too. Everything's available. So moving on, we'll talk about the divine plan. The Tibetan master GK talked about the plan, not so much as a plan of evolution or soul unfoldment, but saying that when it fully manifests, it is a production of a subjective synthesis in humanity and of a telepathic interplay which will reveal to man the true significance of his mind and brain and make him the master of that equipment. Paraphrasing the Tibetan, he further said, it confers a much needed readjustment of values, indicating that there is purpose and objective behind all happenings of daily life. The hierarchy as custodians of the plan step down the plan to the service workers, Nuga world servers, via impression for applying spiritual values, ethical leadership, and teaching on the value of right human relations and harmlessness. This produces an understanding and consciousness of how we can consciously develop our minds to a thinking or mental understanding and perception. That is, we learn to become responsive rather than just emotional or reactive. GK tells us we won't know the plan until we reach the third initiation, but know that it gives mankind purpose, vision, and serves as a blueprint for evolution of the lower four kingdoms. The plan for humanity can also be seen as an energy formula, that of a plan of love and light, expressing the power of a will to good for the world as a whole. And finally, there's at least two separate interpretations of the plan as it unfolds for humanity. One by the everyday person and the other by the spiritual hierarchy or the Nuga world servers. For the everyday person, the working out of the plan, which they may or may not be aware of, leads to a world at peace and an easier material life. For the spiritual hierarchy and Nuga world service workers, the plan involves an unfolding of a spiritual recognition and circumstances which will raise and expand the consciousness of individuals and groups to practice spiritual values such as cooperation, goodwill, and enabling right human relations working out in all sections of humanity. As a result, man will naturally want, through his own free will, a better political, social, and physical environment. I'll be expanding on this concept of the plan shortly when I introduce the work of this first seed group, the Telepathic Communicators. Focusing on the hierarchy in their work, they are a group of advanced souls who suffered and worked off karma and participated in the cycle of rebirth. Major achievement for each one of the masters was to expand their consciousness into greater inclusivity and a mastery over the physical, emotional, and mental natures, that is, the lower 49 planes. They are the custodians of God's plan who help humanity respond to the will and purpose of God. Major purpose of the hierarchy is to facilitate the unfoldment of the plan into full manifestation on earth. And this is done through the full manifestation of the 10 seed groups. They are doing this by communicating ideas, impressions to individuals who are sensitive or receptive for influencing society and humanity as a whole. For these individuals, ideas and impressions amount to revelation. In addition to being custodians of the plan, each member of the hierarchy has the following responsibilities: to train individuals on the path of service and carry out the plan within his or her capacity and where his or her skills fit best. To act as a transforming energy of will and love by stepping down these potent energies and transmitting them to the service workers, humanity, and the lower kingdoms. At the upcoming conclave of 2025, DK indicates that the hierarchy will probably externalize. This is not just the masters returning in physical form, but it is in fact an externalization of higher or soul values, such as cooperation, goodwill, and inclusiveness, working out through the 10 seed or service groups. These values have been penetrating into the minds and soul of humanity through leaders in politics, science, religion, education, economics, and the arts for generation. I'll talk about the conclaves and their historic significance in October's talk. Note that neither the hierarchy nor the service workers will ever impose on man's free will. Their purpose is to inspire those individuals who are sensitive to impression to see a different vision than the path of separateness and selfishness, to make changes in expanding his or her own consciousness. Therefore, man by his own choice becomes his own savior. As much as the individual sees hindrances in his own being and has the will to move through them, he will eventually be inclined for wanting to follow the path of liberation and help others along the way. The Masters Ashram. There are 7 main ashrams, and they all work under specific influence from one of the 7 rays and constitute one great ashram, namely hierarchy. As I mentioned, or briefly suggested at least, a specific discussion on the rays is beyond the scope of this course. For those who are interested in information about the rays, 7 rays, please refer to the handout, the 7 rays, or by going to the makara.us website. And there's plenty of information there about the rays. Talking about the ashrams again, suffice it to say an ashram is a field of unified awareness and spiritual center where the master gathers his disciples and provides instruction and feedback. The master works with the group to focus a particular energy for carrying out the plan using telepathy, impression, or the intuition. The spiritual worker becomes part of an ashram when beginning the probationary path. However, he is not considered trusted in the eyes of the ashram until he attained a measure of purification of his personality and has become harmless in his character. As a member of the ashram, there is no expression of the lower nature, separatism, personality reactivity, or anything of a material nature ever reaches the ashram. Later, after the first initiation, a measure via a measure of soul infusion, the group's sensitivity allows the disciple to be closer to the heart of the group. Sometime during the second initiation, the disciple becomes accepted into the group center and can participate in consciously manifesting the plan subjectively with the masters and other group members. I'll stop here and ask if there's any comments or questions at this point.
Just a reminder to slow down a little bit.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's more challenging. Yes. Okay.
I know.
Okay. Service workers, also known as the New Group of World Servers. We understand that when the service workers or leaders are conscious of their service work, they have a relative soul alignment or integration. This allows their service activities to take on a new dimension. They then can become conscious change agents who can positively influence the social and political activities in the outer and subtle realms for making the divine plan work out. An influential soul-aligned and consciously aware individual or group can have a significant impact and can reverse the destructive direction in which humanity is moving. There is evidence of this already happening in some quarters, such as through protecting civil rights around the world, but it requires continual momentum and many spokespersons in all the seed groups. Since humans create the greatest impact on all planetary resources, it is the service workers who must be aware of the myriad of subjective influences in the political and social realms, such as from war, social issues, or natural catastrophes. And these are around us 24/7 and show us how the application of right human relations will change people's attitudes. Note, I am not recruiting anybody of you or any of you to engage in spiritual activity, but to inform about the present world situation from an esoteric viewpoint. It is up to you to participate in world change if that is your inspiration. However, I will quote GK from Dino 1, Discipleship New Age, Volume 1, page 45, if you're interested in that. The quote is, "Any person who takes the position that the work to be done is only upon the inner planes and that he is working solely from mental or spiritual levels of consciousness is not right in his conception of the process. Inner work which does not work out into objective activity upon the physical plane is wrongly oriented and inspired." So in essence, GK is saying that just meditating alone is not enough to affect change in the world. He is suggesting, or he's actually stating, this is DK and Alice Bailey, they're basically saying that objective work, meaning going out and participating and making change happen in the world, however you see that happening, however you feel inspired to do, that is a change he's talking about. Whether we are conscious of it or not, we are influenced from within and moving towards an expansion of greater cooperation, goodwill, and better human relations. In esotericism, we call this right human relations. Now, this is a theme that I want to emphasize in the course right here too, is the concept that whether we're conscious of it or not, we talk about the New Global World servers and how they're receiving impressions and the disciples and their change agents out there, but there's the masses of humanity that are also influenced on a subjective level. They may not be conscious of it at all. Indeed, there could be leaders of corporations, there could be leaders of nations, and they may not be consciously aware of impression either, but they are still being influenced by impression.
David?
Yes.
Karen says, did you say that at the 2025 conclave, some of the hierarchy will externalize?
Yes, this is what GK says. They said that I'll talk about more about the conclaves in October's talk, but it's the idea that the conclave takes place each century, approximately the 25th year of that century, since basically the 1400s, I believe. Anyhow, it's basically, the hierarchy makes a decision about what is the current state of evolution of humanity. Are they ready to move forward? Are they ready to be infused with new impacts, spiritual impacts, which is a very powerful thought form, energy and tension given to people in humanity to cause crisis and then go through crisis and then cause change and then new revelation to come forth. This is what it's about. There's more, but I'll talk about that next month. But yes, there's definitely, they're thinking about externalizing with the 2025 conclave. So finally, what are the 10 seed groups? The 10 seed or service groups were first defined in the early 1930s by the Tibetan master DK as a long-term experiment by the hierarchy. The word seed implies that it is the ashram that seeds or communicates through impression the essence of what a specific group does and will become, particularly on the physical plane. The endeavor is intended to create 10 external service groups corresponding to those already existing at the ashramic level. Thus, as an impulse of evolution, hierarchy established each of the groups as magnetic and focal points of energy with the intent of creating the same energy on the physical plane. At the time of the conclave of 1925, the masters noted that there was numerous service groups and individuals, but they were not connected with a unified purpose. After 1925, the New Group of World Servers was defined and changed and charged with the purpose of bringing coherence and connectedness between all service groups. So they're starting to work as a unified group at that point. At this time, hierarchy acknowledged that there existed the kernel of spiritual understanding for each of the seed groups. Together, they are all working esoterically via inner planes, inspiration, and connection under the master's supervision for manifesting spiritual values and expression through each seed group. Service workers are active in all the seed groups currently, and their activities help to subjectively transform civilization with the objective of impressing the plan on leaders of the 10 seed groups. This will bring about cohesion and revitalization that will eventually establish each group as a powerful focal point for the planet. As stated before, the service workers around the world are active in the political, social, cultural, healing, educational, scientific, and economic fields. And each one of those is represented by a separate seed group. It is interesting to note that members of a seed group are not necessarily spiritually focused, nor do they need to be at this point in planetary history. It's that they are responding to spiritual impression that is important. It is the service workers that bring a spiritual understanding and influence to spiritualize the seed group and its activity. And one of the handouts that I have is called the 10 seed groups table. So it gives a brief outline of each one of the seed groups and what their purpose is. In the coming months, we'll be discussing what each seed group is destined to become in the new age. We'll begin with seed group 1, the telepathic communicators. Any comments or questions from anybody at this point?
Nope.
All right, let's move on to the first seed group, telepathic communicators. Telepathic communicators are energy and thought communicators. Working on the mental plane, they send and receive ideas and impressions via telepathy from the master or the ashrams and act as transmitters, carrying illumination between groups of thinkers. For the outer world, this amounts to educating the public. Their work is equivalent to a national conversation about how we humans think, feel, and act in our world. Through this, the service workers are able to implement goodwill, right human relations, and harmlessness in all their activities. Their work involves changing the direction of thought currents in the lower 18 subplanes via telepathy and impression. This causes speech to be transcended between individuals and groups so that a new form of communication can be brought about. This is a long-term goal of the hierarchy. The function of the service group, the function of the service workers in this group is to interpret the ideals and objectives which should govern the race, and to familiarize the public with the immediate possibilities. This all enables human progress and helps individuals and groups to participate in the unfoldment of the plan. By these means, they will eventually awaken in the masses with an intelligent response and an ardent desire to move towards working out of the plan through the various service groups. The telepathic communicators have the ability to sense the higher vision of the plan unfolding and have a direct knowledge of the plan for causing people's consciousness to want to come together in unity. Telepathic communicators also serve as custodians of group purpose from the masters and thus relate to all other seed group types where they communicate the concept of unity and cooperation. So a group purpose would be communicating unity and cooperation. Their activity works on the inner planes and supports actions through government, economy, education, healthcare workers, scientists, and the arts. For the aspirant or disciple who aligns with the soul, he invokes and attracts details of the plan into his field of consciousness within his capacity to interpret that. A man who is truly telepathic and can receive impression and the intuition He knows that it should be developed to allow for clear communication and direct knowledge. In this case, he has polarized himself in the soul consciousness. Polarized here means that he's focused only in the soul consciousness and worked from that space. From this, his personality must become decentralized and allow him to be sensitive to impression coming from the soul, from a master, or from the world of the intuition. Ideally, the work of the telecommunicators involves strong alignment and integration of the personality with soul, mind, brain, working essentially as one. Now, of course, what I'm describing here is basically someone who is relatively conscious of this whole process. We don't know the plan. We can only have senses of it and ideas about what DK and Alice Bailey told us, and perhaps even by Blavatsky too. And so we're just getting a small sense of it, but making sure that people cooperate, they practice right human relations with each other, cooperation, goodwill, understanding, and collaboration. These are major focal points to pass as ideas through telepathic communication. Let's illustrate how the national conversation influences the actions through the following movements. The women or Me Too movement. In our current world, the telepathic communicators hold the higher concept of right relationship working out between men and women. This helps to overcome the issue of sexual harassment, as women are treated as unequals, such as not receiving equal pay for the same or similar work of men. Me Too movement is calling out the patriarchal, bullying, chauvinistic male energies that have characterized millennia of activity. On an international level, there is the issue of allowing girls and women to have equal access to education, such as for women, girls in Muslim and Arab countries. Another movement, another significant movement of our time is about racial equality and human rights working out for all minorities. Solving this problem by bringing all peoples, regardless of race and ethnic heritage, the same rights in a material and cultural sense. On a higher level, this is a thought form of brotherhood, acceptance, and tolerance in the public conversation, and it is in essence the practice of right human relations. Another movement which has been going on for probably centuries is the concept of ending corruption. Since at least the early 20th century and before, subtle energies toward transparency, accountability, and integrity, that is, very simply, honesty in all organizations and institutions across all seed groups, has permeated the world communication in broadcast and print media. This is also an idea of ending selfish tendencies and working in cooperation toward a more equitable and society focused on sharing its resources. Then we have the environmental movement, and it's basically twofold. There is the concept of an existing unity that exists between the human kingdom and the lower three kingdoms. The lower three kingdoms being the animal, the plant kingdom or vegetable kingdom, and of course the mineral kingdom. And the human kingdom is considered the fourth kingdom. And that the environment or all these kingdoms must be protected and not exploited. Another issue around the environmental movement is that countries and governments need to be taking steps to negate all forms of pollution and destruction of the Earth's ecosphere to protect the Earth for future generations. And people and groups or NGOs are working around the world and are using the TV, the internet, blogs, and social media to bring awareness of the dangers of destruction to habitats, deforestation, overpopulation, climate change, and pollution by individual, government, and corporations. From an esoteric point of view, these movements are not just physical plane issues, but thought forms and conversations of how society needs and should be responsible for its own well-being and all kingdoms on the planet. Again, think of the thought forms and ideas as impressions, and the impressions, excuse me, the impressions for us here on the human kingdom, here in the physical plane, turn into thought forms, and the thought forms are transmitted out to people throughout all the seed groups and to the masses of humanity. Thought forms that could precipitate a movement might be development, evolution, shift, act, action, progress, and crusade, or a tendency. So if you hear those words, that can precipitate people to action. And these are ideas that are put out in the thought forms of humanity.
David?
Yes.
Sorry, you've got a comment from Yvonne. She says, it sounds like you must be a third-degree initiate to be in this group.
No, I would not necessarily say that. Certainly the initiates would be able to interpret this information at a much more perhaps detailed level and intimate level and communicate that. But I think people only need to be open to impression. And it's like, you know, we saw, like, for example, the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein several years ago when he was finally exposed as molesting women. And that's very obviously a thought form of saying this cannot continue. The chauvinistic male controlling and pushing and bullying women, we saw what the former president of the United States did with women too. And so we cannot continue to have this happening. That's a thought form. We don't need to be a third level initiate to be able to see these thought forms and having them being interpreted. It does help for sure, but we're not there yet, most of us.
And another
Yes.
comment, can one be in more than one group?
Oh,
or
yes.
are we generally just, okay. All right.
Oh, yeah, we definitely can be part of more groups or more than one group. For example, myself, I'm very sensitive to the political group, the scientist group, you know, which is political group is the political organizers, Seed Group 5, Seed Group 7, the scientific workers. I sensitivity toward the religious workers too, which is the Seed Group 6. I mean, I'm sensitive to many of these different groups and have an interest in many of them. So it's actually to be able to communicate this information in this way through this course is making me sensitive to all the groups. So that's for me personally, but it's like what you align with, what you're sensitive to is which I'm encouraging you very strongly to tune into. Use your intuition with all this material. For this slide and information, I want to emphasize that technology facilitates growth in humanity, obviously. We saw with the Gutenberg Bible that back in the 1400s, the Bible was printed and only the people who could read or people who could read it and then make it verbally public to the public exposed people to mentally understanding the words of the Bible at that time. Come forward centuries later, we have all sorts of things that were printed in text and media, and they influenced humanity, such as scientific technology from Newton and Galileo and from other great scientists in the Age of Enlightenment too, from Rousseau and from Voltaire. But here in the 20th century, especially since the 1970s, thoughts and ideas were communicating using the existing technologies, just as they were long ago. In the 20th century, we had the telegraph, letter writing, print media, television, movies, and radio. And of course, here in the last quarter of the 20th century and here into the 20th century, we have an explosion of communication. And this has caused more advent of more powerful technologies, the internet, Zoom, phone apps, Facebook, Skype, personal computers, etc. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because This accelerates people's growth. This accelerates the mind. It accelerates the impressions, the thought forms coming forward. Whoever communicates them, whether they're truth or lies, or whether they're higher impressions or their selfish impressions, this information is now being communicated more powerfully, and therefore it affects the evolution of the individual and the groups and the planet. And of course, we have the, just as we're doing right now, the higher level teachings can be using video and voiceover on the internet through meditation, such as through webinars like we're having right now. Teachings through the Lucis Trust, Maury Federation, the Seven Ray Institute, the Theosophical Society, and many others. And through this work, people are brought closer together in relation on the inner planes. They're sharing ideas. They're in communication with each other, not just verbally and visually, but they're on a thinking level, and they're picking up impressions from each other without the impediment of time and distance. Now, this is a theme that I want to emphasize that's going to come up in different seed groups. Telepathic communicators influence leading people in all professions. And in the book Externalization of the Hierarchy by Alice Bailey, the Tibetan master says, Group 1, the telepathic communicators, can telepathically influence leading people and speak to their minds so that they may be impressed with the need, which has been described as one of the great ones, as the loving salvage of the world. They must be led to realize that their policies must be determined by world good. So in essence, this is the concept that the masters, or higher guides, the initiates are communicating with leaders and influencing their minds through impression or telepathy. Another perspective on how communication happens in society is through the influence of think tanks and lobbyists. Between the United States and Europe alone, there are several thousand think tanks and over 30,000 lobbyists. Each has a measure of influence on government, economies, and national culture. Think tanks are institutions with experts from government, economy, and science who research and produce analysis for providing background and policy on how issues should go forward in government or industry. Their work constitutes concretized thought forms that influence politics, economics, etc. Today, many of the ideas discussed by politicians and economists originated from think tanks or lobbyists who influence the leadership of all the seed groups, although they exist with largely crystallized and emotionally charged thought forms that are often biased toward conservative or liberal values and not necessarily based on the needs of humanity at large. So just as an example, if somebody wants to propose legislation for some environmental activity, there are lobbyists who will come forward and they will actually write the legislation for the legislator, for the senator or the congressperson. They will actually write and describe it right down to the letter and the crossing the T's and the I's, so they can submit it as is, and they can modify it at that point. But they are submitting concretized thought forms already written down. These are ideas and they're presented already. That's how powerful this is. This is very real example of the telepathic communicators.
David?
Yes.
Sorry, before you move on.
Go on.
Kim says, where is the line between telepathically influencing and affecting free will?
Excellent question, of course. If you look back over the centuries and the history that has taken place, of course, we have that advantage in retrospect. We can look back and say how somebody says something and then it influences history, or some activity has influenced history. Like what Abraham Lincoln did when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He got the impression saying slavery must end. So he created that Emancipation Proclamation, and that became a concretized thought form. Okay, so where does telepathy come in? It is, I can't really tell you at this point exactly what the difference is, except that I know that when Alice Bailey was communicated to in 1919 by GK, he was communicating to her just as I am talking to you right now. They were having a conversation, as I understand it, basically mostly one way, because GK was transmitting his information. The first book of Initiation, Human and Solar, I believe, was the first book. But anyhow, that information was transmitted telepathically without words. So what we're talking about is basically the person is their equipment. They have their own personal subjective equipment, which is open to telepathic communication, or they have the capacity for telepathy. Now, this is more than just simply says, well, the phone is ringing and I know who that is, not because you were expecting it, because you were thinking of that person. And that's a form of telepathy. It has to do with who you are as a person, how you're spiritually developed. And Blavatsky also had this exact same ability that Alice Bailey did, where she was developed as a telepath, a very sophisticated telepath like Alice Bailey. And she was able to hear the transmission directly from the master to create the secret doctrine in the 1880s. So it has to do with the person and how their equipment is developed. Most people, I would say, are probably not telepathic, but are sensitive to impression. And I don't know what the fine line is to discern the difference between the two there. The impression is like, for example, you hear maybe the quality or the tone of my voice, and you're able to discern something about me personally. Or you see somebody and you see how they're holding their body, and what is your impression from that? I don't know. There's many different ways you can do this, but it's basically using the intuition. So, any other questions?
Nope, that's all I see right at the moment.
Okay. This is a theme that's going to come up throughout the course too. The activity of the Black Lodge. The Black Lodge is a term that GK uses, or Alice Bailey uses in their writings. It refers to when a new positive initiative comes up, that is a new thought form or an impulse. The Black Lodge counters with doubt and is wanting to maintain the status quo or keep major players in power to block change. So the Black Lodge does not like change. The Black Lodge does not like evolution to move forward. This represents maintaining the status quo of materialism and the form nature dominating. In esotericism, we call this involution. From Treatise on White Magic, GK notes that there is a clashing of three types of force in the world today. The first one is one emanating from the holders with the old tradition, who, emphasizing the form nature, and from the past produce the destruction of those forms. Another type of force emanating from the inner group of mystics, who, under the guidance of the planetary hierarchy, are building the new form. So many of us esotericists could be considered to be, quote, the inner group of mystics, although we may or may not be conscious of this fact. If you're on the probationary path going forward to discipleship, to initiation, then you are automatically part of the ashram, although you may not be conscious of that fact. You may be inclined to be part of a particular group or activity. Another force emanating from the masses, who belong to neither group and who are wielding force as yet blindly and often unwisely, and are creating chaos in their wake. And until such time comes when they recognize those constructive channels into which the force or energy, the clashing force or energy, can be wisely poured. So when you have mob energy, such as what took place at the Capitol of the United States in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, that was a mob energy going on there. And it was there for destructive purposes. and it was blindly use of force, and it was an unwise use of force, and created a certain amount of chaos. Keep in mind that the so-called dark forces are an ever-present and in the background as an energy on both the inner and the outer planes. We note that the forces of light build community and group with the ideas of brotherhood, cooperation, and people working together with tolerance. They help society progress towards unity, accepting all people regardless of race, ethnic origin, that we are all brothers. From Externalization of the Hierarchy, GK says, the forces of darkness are powerful energies working to preserve that which is ancient and material. Hence, they are preeminently the forces of crystallization of form and the lure, L-U-R-E, of that which is existent in the form life of the three worlds. They consequently block deliberately the influence of that which is new and life-giving, and they counteract the effects of the oncoming culture and civilization to feed steadily the existing fire of hate, separateness, of criticism, and of cruelty. That was from Externalization of the Hierarchy. This is to say that the everyday man is influenced, but the disciples unknowingly can also be swayed. For esotericists and service workers, they are conscious of the working out of the pairs of opposites. For those people studying this material, they can look back and say, oh, well, there's this viewpoint, and then there's that viewpoint. You could say there's the conservative viewpoint and there's the liberal viewpoint, and they're both representing different divergent opinions and ideas. So they are working out, they represent the pairs of opposites there in that case. And I'll be returning to this theme and the influence of the Black Lodge throughout the course, as I said. Okay, the telepathic communicators, their ray influence and links with the ashram. The ashramic influence, impressions filtered down into the lower mind and are concretized into thought forms and expression of the lower human will. When an impression becomes a focused tension from the masters or the guides, it is essential, it is in essence an evocation of energy. It affects spiritually evolved people of all degrees and all levels across all cultures. So they're saying when an impression comes from the master of a particular ashram, for example, the political organizers, for example, the impression comes down to say, we want people to communicate better. So we want to end corruption, for example. So that means more accountability, more transparency, and more communication on that level for people to do this. And this is not just the United States, of course, this is around the world, all humans in incarnation, wherever they have levels of power. An example of a higher evocation coming from the ashram could be evoking the principle of sharing, bringing forth the thought form of peace, elimination of violence and warring tendencies, or caring for the environment. Keep in mind, again, these are all thought forms and impressions that are evoked to people who are sensitive to it. To be open to these evocations of a higher spiritual tension, the spiritual man and groups must align or be in rapport with the highest tension. Thus, their refocused tension becomes intention as they go about their spiritual work. For the ray influence, first ray, I'll go through most of the rays here. The first ray is basically influencing government, politics, law, and any circumstance where leadership and executive action is necessary. Now, this certainly could be at the level of a corporation too, or even a city council, because they have a level of leadership too and executive action. The second ray could be involved with acts of compassion after a natural disaster. So the second ray influences people to open their hearts and to give and to be compassionate, particularly saying after Hurricane Ida hit the East Coast with a hurricane, or it originated down in the Gulf and it did incredible devastation in Louisiana. People through the media was being communicators. So of course, it's also the trained observers, which I'll get to next month. But in the example there, the thought form of compassion and helping other people, that thought form is out there already and it's helping people. For the third ray, the fields of work in which intellectual rigor and resourcefulness are required. This is commonly involved with theoretical academics, engineering, business, or speculative pursuits in systems thinking. So it's basically relating one system to another. It doesn't necessarily have to be just focused on intellectual levels. It can be anybody who's using their mind for analytical purposes. They are influenced by this ray. The fourth ray, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
You have a couple of questions here.
Yes, go ahead.
Janet says, as influencers, I would feel that it is like being a sign, as in advertising. You are not lying or boxing the person into a corner, just presenting so it's there.
Well, interesting. That's exactly what I personally strive to do, is to personally just simply state my position from the esoteric viewpoint, what this is about, what the telepathic communicators are about. And I'm not trying to influence you to say that, or that you must do this or you must do that. No, I'm just simply stating the information and just putting it out there. And that's basically what the third ray person would be doing. They'd be analyzing something and literally just putting it out there on a neutral plane and let you as the listener or the participant decide which course of action you want to take.
And then there's another one from Leslie. She says, many of us will be using a related new moon scene thought. Through the impression and expression of certain great ideas, humanity must be brought to the understanding of the fundamental ideals which will govern the new age. This is the major task of the new group of world servers. That last part was the quote that they're using as the new moon seed thought.
That sounds great. That's totally aligned with exactly what this is about. The seed thoughts, definitely, you can get the seed thoughts from Lucis Trust, or from, if you're part of the Arcane School, or from some other esoteric school material, like Moria Federation. You may have seed thoughts or affirmations also, and those can be guides in consciousness because they were originally inspired from higher impressions and concretized. Fourth ray initiatives or fourth ray influence could be in the form of peacekeeping initiatives, psychotherapy, mediation and diplomacy. It also strongly influences the creative arts and all work that involves beautification. Sixth ray influence, strongly involved in social causes, religious activities, and charitable work. Such disciples are also attracted to either passive or militant activism, could be. Seventh ray types, or people that are influenced, are attracted to environments which are structured and organized around management, administration, and project planning. Basically, seeing a synthesis and pulling different parts of the whole together to analyze, breaking them apart, then putting them back together again and seeing the whole. Disciples in any of these activities shape and influence the organization. So,
David, did you miss 5?
5, yes, that would be that could be people that think on a very concrete level, perhaps even the scientists who are very discerning. You might, today's world, of course, we have with the COVID pandemic crisis, the scientists are frequently making comments, or people from the CDC and the National Institute of Health, or even the WHO, World Health Organization, they're all making comments basically from a scientific viewpoint and putting thought forms out to the masses so they can interpret things. These are basically fifth-ray influences too. And if you note that with the influence of these rays or energies, this is indicative of how the seed groups are interconnected and functioning together, such as you have the overlap of, like with the pandemic and the COVID news and information, regardless of what it is. You have the media. The media is working together with the politicians, working together with the scientists, working together with the pharmaceutical companies, which are part of the economy. I mean, they're all working interrelated together. I'm not just being neutral and putting those out as to whether they're good or bad. And this will become, as they're functioning together, will become more evident in the coming months as we study each seed group and how they're influencing civilization. Go ahead.
David, Kim says, and I'm not sure I understand all of this. She says, CDC and who are more, all the scientists and doctors standing up, speaking out, might be more the higher impressions.
I would say they're more the higher.
Oh, more Black Lodge. CDC and who are more Black Lodge are the scientists and the doctors speaking out.
Well, the concept of the COVID scenario for the last year and a half, 2 years, and the pandemic, there's been all sorts of people that sow doubt in whether people should be vaccinated or whether what vaccination is the right one or not. There's disagreement about whether we wear a mask or whether they should be mandated or not. These are all thought forms and ideas, whether you agree with them or not. It's just simply, it's just plain information. It's out there in the media right now as thought forms. And those, we all have our impressions about what that means to us and what intuitively, what does that feel like for us? Or what is the direction for us? What do I sense the direction for my community is? I look at the zip code from where I'm at and I say, oh, well, there's the amount of people who are infected with COVID is now increased because we know that certain people are not wearing masks or they're not vaccinated or they, you know, or something like this. This is all part of the thought form energy that could be going on. So, from a cultural perspective, there are thought forms that influence. There are many thinkers who may not necessarily be spiritually or esoterically inspired or aligned, but have ideas for positively transforming humanity. One such person is Derek Jensen, who wrote the book Endgame. The book is interspersed with ideas where he describes as the inherent unsustainability of civilization. In his book, he asks, do you believe that this culture will undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable world of living? Nearly everyone he talks to says no. His next question is, how would this understanding, that is, this culture will not voluntarily stop destroying the natural world, eliminating indigenous cultures, exploiting the poor, and killing those who resist, shift our strategy and tactics? The answer is nobody knows, because we never talk about it, or we're too busy pretending the culture will undergo a magical transformation. In the book Endgame, he says it's about the shift in strategy and in tactics. Go ahead, BL.
That was the question. Karen asked what was the title of the book, and you just said it again.
Yeah, it's Endgame. In South Africa, where apartheid took place 20 years ago or more, transformation was partly the result of a changing of thought current on the inner planes. It embraced the idea that humans cannot exist in isolation, that we depend on connection, community, and caring. Simply, we cannot be without each other. This philosophy requires a conscious shift in how we think about ourselves and others, especially at a time when our nation is more divided than ever. And the reconciliation that took place after apartheid focused on the humaneness of each individual. It understands that the potential of human beings working collectively to achieve goals is infinitely greater than the potential of any individual separately. There are some scientists, such as Fridtjof Capra or Derek Jensen, who believe a new vision or systems theory is needed on how we should look at the world. I'll be returning to this concept of the systems theory in different talks. The systems theory is that our soul is a living system existing with other systems. If we can plug in, integrate, and perceive, we can come to realize and have a perception of how our livingness connects and influences other people and things. We need a new vision, a new vocabulary and concepts to tackle humanity's problems. And of course, we remember the quote from Einstein, who said that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we use to create them. This understanding would help humanity rectify overpopulation issues, overconsumption, sustainability versus the unsustainable, right distribution of food supplies, water, and resources. And of course, this discussion overlaps with other seed groups in the political, economic sector, which I'll be talking about for the future talks. The concept of a new vision and systems theory also extends to proliferation of arms around the world, weapons and arms. They are sold by wealthy nations to whomever wants them, whether individuals or nations. And what about the concept of wanting to establish peace and cooperation between peoples and nations? We, the United Nations and leading nations, should hold the practice of not supplying arms to anybody or group entity. The idea. There's a strong vision of how gross environmental degradation is causing mass extinctions of animals and insects here in the 21st century. It affects habitats, the use of pesticides and poaching, the sale of exotic animals in markets in China, which is very strongly connected with the spread of the COVID pandemic. And these affect people in nations of today. You know, it goes beyond borders, let alone future generations. This is a notion of really embracing the concept at the policy level. So I will basically conclude by saying, and summing up, the takeaway that I want to leave you with today is that there is a thought form for showing divine purpose in all that we do. Spiritual seekers must see, understand, and identify with the flows of energy and force in ourselves and our world to initiate change. We must become the change we want to see happen in the world. This is and continues to happen through changing the thought patterns in society. We acknowledge that there's a breakdown and shift happening on both the inner and the outer planes, and that we must be present and play our role. We see this as a call and an appeal for us to act and recognize our purpose and see it as clear as possible. We need to use our creative energies for creating the true and the beautiful and build right human relations in all our activities and relationships across all groups. With my overview of the Telepathic Communicators service group, these descriptions are mostly what the masters intend this group to become in the future. From our perspective, they are ideals. Some is already visible. Most of it is still quite far off. I realize that most of us cannot be concerned with directly implementing right human relations. At the same time, be open to impulses and impressions from the souls or masters, particularly when we meditate. That's our primary means for connecting with perhaps receiving telepathy and or receiving impressions. But you can certainly receive telepathy and impressions without necessarily being in meditation. So how do we orient ourselves and take ourselves to the next level of seeing ourselves as part of the solution? I suggest this be done with two possibilities. First, by meditating and developing a sense of connectedness with all that breathes. This might involve sensing your place in evolution, tuning into the higher group purpose, and allowing for the higher creative intelligence to flow through you. Another possibility is by supporting spokespersons who can communicate the higher ideals and values without getting lost in partisan politics. That's also another theme that I'm going to be bringing up more and more throughout this course, is the concept that we need more spokespersons. There was a quote that I cannot remember where it's from, but GK talked about the concept of supporting those people of the Nuka World servers who are talking about higher evolution, higher spiritual values and possibilities, and is supporting those people as much as possible. So this is along that same theme. So this can be our contribution. Any comments or insights anybody has?
Okay, we've got a couple of comments here, and that'll give people time to add if anybody else has anything. Michael Crow put a link to your website, your Sacred Teachings website,
Thank
so
you.
people could look for your books.
Okay.
That link to that website is also on the general announcement on our Moira Federation website, public website, as well as your Makara page where the recordings will go.
All right.
So, public service announcement there.
Okay. Right.
And then Kim is doing interviews for her Awaken series. And she would like you to, if you would like to give an interview for her Awaken series, I'll send you her email so
Okay,
you
that'd be
guys
great,
can
of course.
discuss that. Okay.
Of course. Thank you.
Jan says, David, all these seed groups are working towards unification.
That's right.
How does the stage of isolated unity fit in with this? P.S. I really don't understand the term isolated unity.
Let me, let's see, isolated unity. I'm reading this from my own glossary, which I just put out last year. That's available on my website too. A little PSA for myself. I'll read what I wrote here through my own research. Isolated unity is connected with the mental plane and is a reflection of the will to know. The hierarchy and their spiritual workers through the centuries have been working in what occult terms is called isolated unity on the inner planes. This refers to the concept of working in the world, but not of it. They are now preparing to work much closer on the mental plane of the common humanity and the purpose of dissipating any forms of illusion and distortions of reality. Okay, well, that brings up a few points there. We're talking about dissipating forms of illusion, and of course, glamour and illusion. That will be coming. I'll be talking about that quite a bit next month. We're talking about the trained observers, and of course, I encourage anybody and everybody to meditate and to. My concept of meditation, which is there's thousands of forms of meditation, as you know. My concept is to completely take away everything in your consciousness that is not of the soul, which means all thought forms of the personality, all thought forms you have of any ideas, opinions, everything. and completely empty your mind and just being in a state of pure awareness and pure beingness. I talk about this in my book. I talk about it in my book, The Soul Source. I have some descriptions of this in my glossary also. So it's very, to me, it's very important that we learn who we truly are. And me as a personality, this is only my worldly name. It's the name of my driver's license or passport, whatever. It's not who I am. It's how I appear to you. And that what you're doing by listening to me, listening by what I say, and my activity of presenting this material, you're listening and you're discerning. You're using your own dispassion, you're using your intuition and your own sensitivity. So you're using the spiritual equipment that is being developed by your meditations, you're coming in contact with that part of yourself which can discern the truth. It's truth that's discerned only by you, not because I said it or DK says it or Alice Bailey says it. It's because you personally are discerning it. So it's going back to isolated unity. It's being in the world, but not of it. And this refers to also another higher concept of the sense of freedom. And that GK, I don't remember where this was from either, Alice Bailey GK, they basically said something about one of the ultimate things of releasing yourself, the concept of freedom, the higher aspect of freedom is the concept of releasing one from the form nature or the influence or the influence of form. So that's the desire nature, for example. I desire physical contact. I desire physical food and sustenance. I desire to have a thrilling experience. I want to go to Disneyland or something. You see, these are all of the personality and they're all of the form nature. When you get into the deeper forms of meditation and higher communication with the higher self, which is ultimately your monad, but you've got to go through purification and remove all the hindrances that keep you from realizing that. That's what I'm suggesting here. The vast majority of the people will look at me cross-eyed and they have no idea what I'm talking about. You as esotericists can understand much of what I'm saying and discern for yourself. Are there any other questions? Long-winded answer.
No, I don't see any at the moment. And I don't see any hands, so.
Okay, that is all I have for today. For this seed group, for each of the seed groups, or for the vast majority of my my talks, I will be providing some background information. Now, I would suggest, if you have the time, is to listen to this talk again and listen to what some of the background energies are. For example, the concept of the ashram and its influence, what the nature of hierarchy is, the nature of the service workers and their influence, because these are all significant in understanding how the seed groups are working in the world today. The seed groups are an externalization of something already existing in the ashram. But they are quite astral in their activity and their function and their outward appearance right now. But the new group of world servers who are working in each one of those 10 seed groups are there to influence each one of those organizations. Well, I said organization, one of those groups. They do work in organization level, of course, but it's they, the service workers, who are able to pull through the impressions, the ideas, the intuition, using their intuition to know how to move forward with their group and pull forth ideas to help the planet evolve and not devolve. So the background understanding is really, to me, is very significant in understanding how the world is functioning right now on all levels. The term seed groups, service groups, is a term that Alice Bailey and DK put together in the early 1930s, yes. There is other social scientists, if you can call them that, who have different terminology for understanding how civilization is interacting with itself and having conversation with itself. And the concept of the seed groups is basically, how is civilization appearing? How do the Germans interpret it? How do the people from Thailand interpret politics or science or the arts? How do people from Myanmar interpret it? Or how do the religions understand their form of religious belief? It just goes on, and there's this constant 24/7 conversation which is happening on all planes of consciousness. And it's up to us to discern that information and to be sensitive to that if we are so interested. Not just having the equipment, but you have to have the interest too, like I do. But you have to find your own interest, of course, in this, and to know how this world is evolving or not, and what are the implements? What are the impediments that are causing us to be stuck in the mud, so to speak, esoterically, and not moving forward or progressing spiritually or on an evolutionary level? Or what is progressing us forward? What are the ideas? What are the influences? What are the concepts that are moving us forward? These to me are just absolutely fascinating. Hence why I put this whole course together. That's all I have for today. I look forward to seeing you next month in October at this same time, where we talk about the trained observers, the second seed group. And there's a brief description, I believe, on the webpage about what next month's talk will be about also, besides just the trained observers, some of the background information too. Like I talked about, they'll talk about the conclaves next month and the importance of those in a historic setting, and the upcoming conclave in 2025 in just several years. Before I sign off, are there any questions or comments?
I just want to say the next is the 9th of October
Excellent. Okay.
at 7 p.m. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Let me see. You have some thank yous here, and appreciate the handouts. That's really always nice to have those ready.
Yes. Okay.
Michael Crow is telling everyone, if you want the text, you can, wait a minute, what was he saying?
Well, I'm going to be posting this PowerPoint presentation with my notes a little later today. So it'll be available on as soon as Michael Crow or whomever posts it to Makara.
I can explain. Want me to explain?
Yeah, hold on just one second.
Okay.
I'll be posting it later. I have the original version that you gave us a couple of days ago, and then you email me the revised version and I'll replace it there.
I'll give you the revised
website.
version later. Yeah, a little later, sure.
Okay, so this is something that's been ongoing the last month or so. There's a button on your toolbar that says live transcript. If it's not there, then you can click more. And if you say view full transcript, you'll see the entire transcript. And on the bottom, it says save transcript. It'll be saved with timestamps, but you'll still get this in a text version if you click save transcript. And then you can go watch the video too and the audio, get the audio. But if you want the text transcript, you can click that save transcript button and it'll save to your computer.
Great. It looks like the Zoom technology has evolved over the last year to have those new features available.
Yeah, it's evolving a lot.
Excellent, yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think I don't see any more comments or questions or anything. So thank you, David.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your listening participation and your interest, of course. I'll look forward to seeing you next month. I'll sign off now.
Michael, you need to end it, I think.